How can an $8.50 bowl of seafood soup change the lives of thousands of dock workers in Seattle? At 5:10 p.m., Malik Jenkins sat on an Occidental Park bench, facing the cold rain and mean stares in his worn-out safety jacket. After losing his job, his only wish was to bring warmth home to his son, Tarek. But when he saw a shivering blonde woman next to him, he shared half of his dinner. This choice dragged him into a tough legal and workplace battle at Davenport Logistics, facing doubts, class barriers, and hidden enemies. Can a poor father's kind heart break through the cold walls of the rich, or will he lose everything? Before that spoonful of soup ever touched the woman's lips, Malik's whole world had already cracked open that morning. Rain hit the bench in small, cold drops. Steam rose from the paper cup between his hands. His fingers still smelled like diesel and rust. 9 years on the Seattle docks had left marks he could not wash off. The wooden bench beneath him felt damp and swollen, soft in places where the paint had worn away. A street lamp buzzed faintly overhead, casting a weak yellow circle onto the wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a food cart hissed as rain hit its hot metal grill. His phone buzzed at 4:15 that afternoon. One email. No warning. 9 years of loading ships, gone in one automated message. The company called it restructuring. Malik called it something else in his head, but he never said the word out loud. He remembered his first shift on the docks, back when Tarek was only 9 months old. His wife, Aaliyah, had packed his lunch that morning in a folded paper bag. She kissed his cheek and told him he would be great at this. 3 years later, a sudden illness took her from him. Malik learned to pack his own lunch badly and to raise Tarek alone through every fever and every school project. 9 years of calluses and early mornings had built something steady inside him. Now, that steadiness felt like it was cracking straight down the middle. He walked home past shuttered coffee shops and wet sidewalks. His boots left dark prints on the pavement. Somewhere behind him, a delivery truck's engine coughed twice and died. He barely noticed. His mind was already counting dollars he did not have. Home was one room above a laundromat in Hilltop, 23 square feet of peeling paint, and a window that never quite closed. Mold crept along the ceiling corner like a slow gray shadow. At night, ship horns rattled the glass and kept sleep just out of reach. Downstairs, the laundromat's dryers rumbled on a constant cycle, warm air seeping faintly through the floorboards. It was the closest thing to heat the apartment ever got in winter. Malik had learned to be grateful for it anyway. Tarek was 7 years old, with his mother's wide eyes and a laugh that filled the whole room. His asthma inhaler cost $85 a refill. Malik had exactly $12.45 left in his pocket. He knelt by his son's bed that evening and smoothed the thin blanket. "Everything's going to be fine, buddy," he whispered. Tarek nodded, half asleep, trusting him completely. Malik's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He stepped back outside, into the drizzle, chasing one small comfort. $8.50 bought a paper cup of hot lobster chowder from a food cart on First Avenue. Butter and brine drifted up in the steam. He planned to carry it home to Tarek, still warm. But 3 blocks later, in Occidental Park, he saw her. A woman sat alone on a bench, blonde hair soaked flat against her cheeks, arms wrapped tight around her knees. Passersby walked faster when they saw her, eyes down, shoulders turned away. Malik stopped. Something in his chest pulled him toward the bench instead of past it. He sat down beside her, close enough to share warmth, far enough to respect her space. Steam still curled off the soup between his palms. "You look cold," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her lips had gone pale, almost gray at the edges. Rain dripped from her chin on her folded hands. He opened the lid and offered her half without another word. She stared at the cup like she hadn't seen food in days. Then she took it, and her fingers shook against the warm paper. They sat in silence, while the city moved around them, cold and indifferent. A bus hissed to a stop nearby. Its brakes screeched once, sharp against the quiet. Neither of them looked up. The smell of butter and brine mixed strangely with wet pavement and distant car exhaust. Malik noticed her knuckles first, red and cracked from cold. Her coat, thin and gray, looked wrong for the weather. She seemed to have grabbed it in a hurry, never planning to stay out this long. A jogger splashed past them, through a puddle, spraying cold water across both their shoes. Neither one flinched. Somewhere across the park, a food cart owner slammed his metal shutter down for the night, the sound sharp and final. "The system runs on cold numbers," she finally said, her voice rough and low. "But a port only survives because of people who still feel something." She looked straight into his eyes. "Don't let your work clothes decide who you are." Before Malik could respond, she stood and walked into the rain, disappearing between two buildings. He sat there a long moment, the empty cup cooling in his hands. Her words stayed with him long after she was gone. That night, his phone buzzed again, this time with something new. An email from Davenport Logistics, sent to every former dock worker in the system. A temporary port coordination manager role had opened. Interviews would start at 8 o'clock the next morning. The job paid $5,500 a month during the trial period. Rent was due in 2 days, $1,200 he did not have. This email felt less like an opportunity and more like a lifeline thrown into dark water. But the listing demanded a master's degree in logistics management or something close to it. Malik had a high school diploma and two hands that ached at night from 23 years of physical work. He looked in a cracked bathroom mirror before bed. A 37-year-old black man stared back, beard thick, shoulders wide, eyes tired. "What business does a dock loader have?" he muttered, walking into a 40-story glass tower. Old fear crawled up his spine, the same fear from every job rejection he'd ever faced. He almost deleted the email right there. Freelance loading work paid $12 an hour, and it asked no questions about degrees. He remembered the last office interview he'd tried, 3 years earlier, right after Aaliyah passed away. The interviewer had glanced at his resume for 4 seconds, then stood up and shook his hand goodbye. No questions, no second chance, just a closed door, a long bus ride home. That memory alone almost convinced him to stay quiet and small, the way the world seemed to want him. His thumb hovered over the delete button, ready to erase the whole opportunity. Then Tariq coughed in the next room, a wet, rattling sound that cut through the apartment. Malik froze, listening. The sound repeated, sharper this time, and something in him refused to stay quiet any longer. He would not be a coward. While his son needed medicine he could barely afford. He picked his best shirt off a hanger, the only one, without a stain, and laid it across the chair for morning. He ironed the collar twice, even though the fabric had thinned years ago. At 7:45, Malik stepped off the number 42 bus outside a glass tower that seemed to touch the clouds. Marble floors stretched out in front of him, polished so bright they threw back his own reflection. Young applicants filled the lobby in crisp designer suits, tablets tucked under their arms. Malik carried one folder of papers in an old leather bag, its strap cracked from years of use. A few candidates glanced at him and smiled behind their hands. The lobby smelled like fresh flowers and expensive floor polish, sharp and clean. Somewhere above him, an air vent hummed a steady, mechanical note. A security guard near the elevator watched him a beat too long. He walked to the front desk anyway, chin level, shoulders steady. At 7:55, he signed his name on the visitor log. The pen felt strange and light in his rough fingers. Behind him, two young applicants whispered and laughed under their breath. Malik didn't turn around. He set the pen down carefully, like it might break, and stepped back to wait. A tall man in a sharp gray suit walked past at that exact moment, polished shoes clicking hard against the marble. He glanced at Malik's boots and turned to his assistant. "Will a dock loader track dirt on this carpet?" The man's name, Malik would soon learn, was Marcus Vance, vice president of operations. Vance worshipped automation and had nothing but contempt for anyone who worked with their hands. His words landed like a slap, but Malik said nothing back. An older woman named Sarah noticed the soup stains still faint on his jacket collar. She poured him a cup of coffee, without being asked, steam rising between them like a small act of kindness. "Today's test is about Pier 46, she whispered. "Skip the theory. They're losing $145,000 an hour down there." Sarah had worked in human resources for 29 years, long enough to remember when dock workers still got invited to company picnics. She retired in 6 weeks, she told him. She wanted to spend her last days helping people who reminded her of her own father. "He drove a forklift for 31 years, she said, wiping down the coffee station with a worn cloth. Nobody in this building ever asked his opinion, not once. She looked at Malik for a long second. "Don't make his mistake. Speak up today." Malik nodded, gripping the warm cup a little tighter. Her words settled into him like a second cup of coffee, warming something deeper than his hands. "One more thing," Sarah added, glancing quickly toward Vance's office door. "Watch your back around that man. He doesn't lose gracefully." Malik thanked her and tucked the warning away, right next to her advice about Pier 46. The testing room smelled faintly of new carpet, and cold coffee left too long on the counter. Rows of monitors hummed quietly, each one glowing, with a different candidate's login screen. Malik sat at the last open station, near a window streaked with rain. The written test came first, on a computer system Malik had never touched before. His hands fumbled over unfamiliar software menus, sweat beading along his hairline. But when the screen showed a container yard map, something clicked into place. He remembered every crane, every forklift path, every shortcut workers whispered about on break. He redrew the routing by hand, cutting the travel distance by 351 feet compared to every other candidate's plan. Before the group interview, a second test appeared on his screen without warning. It asked him to solve a fake emergency, a crane breakdown blocking 3 loading lanes at once. Most candidates typed long paragraphs full of technical terms. Malik wrote 7 short sentences instead, describing exactly how he would reroute trucks by hand. His answer used plain words, no jargon, nothing borrowed from a textbook. A proctor glanced at his screen twice, frowning slightly, unsure what to make of it. The group interview came next, 5 candidates seated around a glass table. One young man proposed spending $12 million on new automated robots for the port. Heads nodded around the table in polite agreement. Malik spoke up, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "Those robots freeze up in Seattle winter storms," he said. "Only people can adapt fast enough when the ice hits the docks." The room went quiet for a moment. One woman across the table raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. She scribbled something on her notepad and did not look up again for a while. By afternoon, only 3 candidates remained, and Malik's name was one of them. He would present directly to the board of directors on the top floor in a room built entirely of glass and cold air. His stomach twisted as the elevator climbed higher, floor numbers ticking past too fast. He thought of Tarek's small hand in his, and of a stranger's voice telling him not to let his clothes define his mind. The elevator hummed softly, a small motor working hard behind polished steel doors. His reflection stared back at him from the mirrored wall, tired but steady. Somewhere above, a bell chimed once, signaling the 40th floor. The doors slid open onto a hallway lined with black and white photographs of ships from decades past. His boots sank slightly into thick gray carpet, silent compared to the marble downstairs. A single window at the end showed gray clouds pressing low over the water. He straightened his collar outside the boardroom door, breathing slow through his nose. Whatever waited inside, he told himself, could not be worse than watching his son go without medicine. Inside, the boardroom smelled like fresh coffee, an expensive cologne, cold air humming faintly from a vent overhead. Marcus Vance sat at the head of the table, Malik's old termination file open in front of him like a weapon. Let's start with the truth, Vance said, sliding the folder across the polished table. This man was fired from this very company, discarded by the system he now wants to help run. He said it slowly, letting each word land like a stone. No advanced degree, no management background, just a man looking for pity from people who owe him nothing. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Vance leaned forward, resting both palms flat on the table. Let's be honest, he said, lowering his voice like he was doing everyone a favor. This industry doesn't need charity cases. It needs qualified professionals. A thin smile crossed his lips. Malik's face stayed still, but his jaw locked tight beneath the skin. Heat crawled up his neck. His hands, resting on the table, curled slowly into fists he refused to raise. A vein pulsed once at his temple, faint but visible under the fluorescent lights. He said nothing. Somewhere behind him, a chair creaked as one board member leaned back, uncomfortable, waiting for this to end. Vance leaned back, satisfied, certain the interview was already over. The room fell into a silence, so complete Malik could hear the air conditioner ticking through the vents above them. Then, at exactly 9:30, the boardroom door opened without a knock. A woman walked in wearing a crisp white suit, blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist. Every board member rose halfway from their chairs. Malik's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. He had watched rain drip from that same jaw the night before, over a shared cup of soup in a public park. Ms. Davenport, Vance said, straightening his tie, so fast his knuckles went pale. His voice cracked slightly on her name. The room's entire mood shifted in half a second. Victoria Davenport, chief executive of Davenport Logistics, walked straight past Vance, without a glance. She stopped in front of Malik and extended her hand, steady and sure. "Thank you for the soup," she said simply. The room fell into total silence. Somewhere down the hall, a printer clicked twice and stopped. Not one board member moved a muscle. Vance's face drained of color, pale as the marble floor beneath his shoes. His mouth opened, then closed again with nothing to say. His polished shoes suddenly felt very heavy under the table. Victoria turned to the stun board. "Last night, I sat in Occidental Park as part of a personal experiment," she said. "I wanted to see who still shows kindness with nothing to gain from it. Every person who passed me looked away," she continued, her voice calm but sharp as glass. "Except one man in a worn safety jacket who gave up half his dinner for a stranger." She looked directly at Malik. "That is the kind of character this company has been missing for years." Vance opened his mouth to object, but no sound came out. Victoria asked Malik to present his port solution directly to her, ignoring the rest of the room entirely. He stood, hands steadier now, and walked to the screen at the front. He explained his hybrid system, human coordination paired with simple digital tracking. Respect between managers and workers, he said, raises loading speed by 45% without cutting a single job. One board member, an older man with silver hair, raised his hand with a question. "What happens the first time a worker calls in sick during a storm?" he asked. Malik answered without hesitation. "We already cover shifts by hand every single day. It's the one thing this system does better than any machine." Board members leaned forward, listening now instead of judging. Even Sarah, watching from the doorway, allowed herself a small, proud smile. Vance sat frozen, jaw tight, saying nothing at all. Victoria watched Malik the entire time, arms folded, something like quiet satisfaction settling across her face. She had seen dozens of polished pitches in this room before. None of them had ever sounded this honest. She thought back to the rain-soaked bench and the warm cup he had offered without hesitation. That single act had told her more about leadership than any resume ever could. By the end of the day, Malik had earned something no resume could buy: quiet respect from people who once dismissed him on sight. Vance's objections had turned to ash in his own mouth. But Vance was not finished. That night, he contacted a group of conservative investors still loyal to the automation plan. Together, They quietly disabled the digital coordination system at Pier 46. He met them in a private dining room downtown, three men in dark suits, who had backed the $12 million robot proposal from the start. Over expensive whiskey, they agreed the new hybrid plan threatened their entire investment. One man simply said, "Make it fail tonight." Vance smiled at that, already picturing Malik's humiliation the next morning. He drove to the port alone, confident nobody would ever trace the outage back to him. He framed it as a technical failure, proof that Malik's plan could never work in the real world. No cameras caught him that night, or so he believed, with total, arrogant confidence. Vance had approved the port's new security system himself, 11 months earlier, signing off without reading a single page. He bragged about it once at a company dinner, calling it the smartest investment we ever made. That same system now watched him from 3 different angles, quiet and patient. He walked out of the control room a little, after midnight, satisfied, straightening his tie in the dark hallway mirror. He had no idea the small red light above the door had already saved every second of footage. At 11:45 that same night, a sudden storm slammed into Seattle's coastline without warning. Wind screamed off the water, rattling loose signs along the pier. Rain turned to sleet within the hour. Weather reports had promised light rain, nothing more, nothing dangerous. Nobody at Davenport Logistics expected the harbor to freeze over by midnight. Whatever Vance had planned, the storm now made his plan far more dangerous than he intended. 3 container ships carrying $18 million in emergency medical supplies sat frozen offshore, unable to dock. Without power to guide them in, they would miss their unloading window by dawn. If the ships weren't emptied before 6 o'clock a.m., Davenport Logistics would owe massive contract penalties. Worse, Malik's name and Victoria's judgment would both be publicly ruined by morning. Victoria called Malik at midnight, her voice tight with urgency. "The system's down. Pier 46 is frozen solid," she said. "I need someone who still knows how to run a port without it." Malik didn't hesitate for even a second. He pulled his old safety jacket back on, the same worn fabric that had failed to keep him warm the night before. He drove straight into the storm. At 2 o'clock a.m., sleet cut sideways across the empty docks, stinging any exposed skin within seconds. Malik grabbed a battery-powered megaphone from a maintenance shed, his breath fogging in the freezing air. He called out names he still remembered from 9 years on these very docks. One by one, sleepy voices answered from apartment windows and parked cars nearby. Loyalty, it turned out, still meant something here. Within an hour, 151 former dockworkers arrived, bundled against the storm, ready to work without power or pay guarantees. They trusted Malik's voice more than any automated system ever built. He organized them by hand signals and shouted directions, exactly as he had for nearly a decade before the layoffs. Cranes groaned to life under manual control, metal creaking against the wind and ice. Sweat mixed with sleet on Malik's face as he directed container after container off the ships. His hands, raw from cold, never stopped moving. Every minute mattered, now more than ever. A young worker named Dario slipped near the edge of the dock, boots sliding on frozen metal. Malik grabbed his arm before he could fall, pulling him back with one hard tug. "Watch your footing," he shouted over the wind. "We need every one of you standing." The crane chains rattled loudly against the wind, metal striking metal every few seconds. Somewhere a radio crackled with static, then went silent again. Malik kept counting containers under his breath, refusing to lose track of the number. By 5:15 a.m., the last container touched solid ground, 45 minutes ahead of the deadline. The medical supplies were safe, dry, and finally on their way to hospitals across the region. Marcus Vance arrived at the docks just as the sun broke weakly through the storm clouds. Security guards were already waiting for him, holding printouts from the port's backup camera system. The very cameras Vance had once approved and trusted without question, had recorded his sabotage in full, unedited detail. His own signature was on the installation order years earlier, mocking his arrogance now. He was escorted out in handcuffs before the last truck had even left the pier. His polished shoes slipped once on the wet concrete, and no one moved to help him stand. "This is a misunderstanding," Vance shouted, his voice cracking on the last word. Nobody answered. The dockworkers nearby kept loading, their eyes fixed on the ships, refusing to give him even a glance. A security officer read him his rights near the gate, voice flat and routine. Somewhere behind them, a crane lowered another container into place, steady and calm, like nothing unusual had happened at all. The next morning, sunlight spread warm and golden across the Seattle waterfront, drying the last of the storm's damage. Victoria signed a new document at her desk, ending the automation layoff project for good. Thousands of dockworker families, many of them black families like Malik's own, kept their jobs and their homes because of that single signature. Word spread through the docks. Within hours, quiet and steady like the tide. Outside the main gate, workers gathered in small groups, coffee cups steaming in the cold morning air. Someone had taped a handwritten sign to the fence, simple and crooked. "Thank you, Malik." He read it twice before his eyes started to sting. Sarah found him near the loading office, her retirement only 5 weeks away now. She squeezed his shoulder once, saying nothing, her eyes bright with something close to pride. Behind her, 2 young dockworkers shook hands for the first time in months. Dario, the young worker Malik had pulled back from the frozen edge, waved from across the yard. He shouted something about buying Malik dinner sometime, a promise that felt lighter than any paycheck. Malik was officially named Director of Port Operations that same week at a salary of $112,500 a year. Full medical coverage for Tarek came. With the offer, no exceptions. He walked home that afternoon holding a new lease and a fresh asthma prescription, both paid in full. The mold-stained ceiling of his old apartment felt very far away already. The new apartment sat 3 blocks from Tarek's school, with clean white walls and a window that actually closed. Malik stood in the empty living room for a long moment, listening to how quiet it was, without ship horns rattling the glass. He thought about Aaliyah, then, wishing she could see this small, ordinary miracle. He pictured her smiling at the empty kitchen, already planning where the table would go. For the first time in months, the thought brought comfort instead of pain. Tarek was awake when Malik walked through the door, curled up with a worn picture book on the bed. He looked up, eyes wide, at the fresh hot cup of chowder his father carried inside. Malik knelt beside him and set the soup down gently on the small table. Outside the window, the last raindrops slid slowly off the glass, catching the morning light like tiny diamonds. "Tarek," he said softly, brushing his son's hair back from his forehead. "Kindness and dignity are never worthless, not even on our hardest day." Tarek smiled, still half asleep, and reached for the warm cup. "Today," Malik whispered, watching steam rise between them one more time, "we won." Outside, the port horns sounded low and steady across the water, no longer a warning, but a welcome. Tarek took a slow sip of the chowder, closing his eyes at the warmth. "Dad," he said, "can we get soup again this weekend?" Malik laughed, a real laugh, the first one in weeks. "Every weekend, if you want," he said, pulling his son close. Outside, sunlight climbed higher, over the water, spreading slowly across rooftops that had waited a long time for something good.